have just heard from the attorney for Martese Johnson, Attorney Watkins, and Martese did not speak, but he read a statement from him. And clearly this young man has taken the high road, saying that though he has been bloodied, he remains unbowed, and that his scars will heal, the trauma will not, but that these are a few bad incidents, a few bad officers possibly. It should not reflect on a community that has worked so hard to come together. Taking a very positive and a very high tone for this young man who seems to have an outstanding background there, as we have said in our first segment, and as his attorney reflected. Back with me now are Eugene O'Donnell, professor of law and police study at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Criminal Defense, and attorney John Burris. John, this young man seems to be an exemplary student and really setting a high tone, despite the fact that many feel that he's been wrongfully treated.
Very impressive. I mean, just to take that kind of position, and most people that would happen to, they'd be very vengeful at this moment in time. But I think the most impressive thing to me was the fact that he so willingly talked to not only the president, but to the state police. Generally, if you felt you've done something wrong, or if you've done something wrong and you want to cover for it, you wouldn't talk to the police, and you certainly wouldn't talk to the president. So what you have is a person who strongly feels in his innocence. He carries himself like his innocence. And I think that at the end of the day, he will be vindicated and that no charges will really go forward. And what I would only say about charges, the more serious aspect of this, once an African-American male gets a charge like this and even convicted, if that happened, it could have a very negative impact on his future employment and future lives. So this is more significant than just this here, the event now. It has long-term ramifications. And so when I see cases like this, it's very important not only to get the charges dismissed, but to get a finding of innocence, to have these charges exonerated totally so it does not show up on your record.
Eugene, going broader than the particulars of this case, when you see this young man and this video in the context of the chokehold case in Staten Island, New York, and the situation in Ferguson and Tamir Rice in Cleveland, isn't it understandable why many of us are raising the question of how we deal with policing in this country? Granted, all of these situations may not pale out to be concluded the way that many feel, but there's not a mass hallucination going here where you have all of these situations seeming to beg for a review of how we deal with policing.
Yeah, and this whole "there's nothing to see here" mentality is really being laid. This, again, we're looking just at the fundamentals here. We don't have to get into the facts here. If you put police people at every bar, worst endings repeatedly, is there nobody in authority? Is there nobody elected? The prosecutor? Where are they in terms of saying these things can only almost, they're going to end badly? Where's the review of this? So there's a lot to see. There's a lot of questions to ask. And there's really disturbing answers. You would think there'd be some foreseeable look-see at these things before they occur, but all too often now, whether you're talking about Ferguson, you're seeing damaged policies, disconnected leadership of agencies, and the most wrong at all. And so, yes.
Well, John, isn't that the point that a lot of us in the civil rights community, you in the legal community, are raising, that we've got to deal with accountability and transparency? And yes, at the same time, we cannot indict all law enforcement or even most, but clearly there needs to be some kind of measures of reform that builds the trust and builds accountability on all sides.
Absolutely. Having been involved in the kind of reform efforts, I know what a challenge it is, but the leadership within a department and leadership within a city are really the focal points of how this can occur. The city, like this president's taking a leadership here at the university, but nationally we see all of these particular cases, and fortunately for a lot of this, now we have videos that shows a real direct light on it, so you don't have to have so many witnesses in the past. So I think we are at a point now, not only only with Ferguson, but all the other cases that are happening around the country where real reform can take place, but there has to be a political will to do this. There has to be a commitment on the part of the command staff within the departments, and to some extent the black community has to show them the way as well, because we need the police, absolutely, but at the same time we don't want to be abused by them, and so that ultimately means now that we're at a critical time where we have all this energy around, that we can in fact in a localized way look at these issues in a way that's personal to a particular department and bring about the kind of reform that's necessary. But the mayor, the police chief, the city administrators, and the command staff have to be on board to hold officers accountable.
And I think, Eugene, it takes the leadership, the political leadership, to respond in a responsible and immediate way, as we're seeing at UVA, apparently, as we saw in Wisconsin. And I think that addresses the concerns, and it means that the leadership in the communities must stand up and say, wait a minute, we must do this in a peaceful way toward reform. And the example of that was this young man who's standing there with stitches in his head, but saying, wait a minute, we still must continue to have a community built on trust. This is not about revenge, just as about doing what is fair.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and collaboration is key. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. This is a kid doing what kids do sometimes, and they need to be treated that way, not as some sort of desperado. The university can leverage its resources. You can go after you can use zoning and other things to go after the sellers of alcohol. But to criminalize this young person in this situation is silly, and to systematically do this is just a recipe for anybody who professes to be shocked that these kinds of things happen.
Yeah.
With this underlying policy. It's a very bad idea, needless to say.
Well, we must continue moving forward. Eugene O'Donnell and John Burris, thank you both for your time this evening.
Thanks, Rev.